I want to start this morning by talking about what scares you. All right, so I've got 5 things here, and I think I'm going to call these the 5 most frightening sights you can ever see. All right, here's number 1. Right, I don't know if you're like me, there's just something wrong with clowns, right? They're a little too lifelike, but they're not real. I think for part of me, it started with a clown named Pennywise. Some of you will know who Pennywise is. If you don't, you probably don't want to Google him. It is probably a rabbit hole you don't want to go down. All right. Here's another thing that I think is extremely frightening is snakes. Right. I mean, look, I'm going to be honest with you. The Bible says this. If you like snakes, you're wrong. Because Satan was a snake, right? And so we'll see that next week, actually. But snake, I don't know if it's the way they slither or what it is about snakes. Let's move on from this picture. Let's get to the next one. There it is. Public speaking. Most studies say the thing that most people are afraid of in life is having to get up in front of a bunch of people and speak. This is not one of my great fears, and it's probably a good thing. But for many of you, this might be the most terrifying thing ever to think, I've got to get up in front of a bunch of people and speak. Now, the next one, I got to give a little explanation. The next one's probably not real frightening for most people. But I think it probably is the most terrifying sight in the world for one college football coach not too far from here. So, I know, but let's be honest. If you're a coach and your name rhymes with Brian Bray, this is the team you can't beat. I think he gets night sweats thinking about him. The last thing, and I think maybe this is the most terrifying of all, is to think that the Wi-Fi might be disconnected, right? How much do we panic when we can't connect to the Wi-Fi? It's like this feeling of, I got to figure out what's wrong immediately. We drop everything else, and we're checking the password, we're checking the router, we're doing everything we can to say, how do I fix this? Because I can't live my life if I'm disconnected from the Wi-Fi. Why is that? Because in our minds, it is Wi-Fi, wireless internet, that connects us to the world, right? If I don't have the Wi-Fi, I can't check my email. I can't check social media. Go on down the list of all these things I can't do. And if I'm disconnected from the Wi-Fi, I'm disconnected from the world. And when we really start to think about it, that seems kind of foolish, doesn't it? Because it doesn't really disconnect us. But we have this deep fear of disconnection. I think it's represented by disconnected Wi-Fi. But all of us, I think, fear this idea that we might not be connected to the world or to the others. And the reality is, the more disconnected we are, the more dysfunctional we become, right? There's something about us, there's something in us that requires connection to others. There's a TV show that I like. It's one of these reality shows. It's called Alone. They take survival experts and they just dump them in the middle of nowhere. Often it's like up in Alaska or Canada or somewhere like that. And basically they just say, hey, you're on your own, good luck. And it's indefinite because whoever stays out the longest wins. And these are experts in the field of survival, right? They know how to build a shelter using just toothpicks and rubber bands. And it will stand the test of time and it'll be perfect for weather. They can start a fire just by clapping their hands. They know how to train a bear if they have to. They know everything about survival. But what's fascinating is on the show, the majority of these survival experts quit not because they're struggling to survive, but because they're lonely. Being alone for a long period of time does something to them psychologically that they're just, I can't handle this anymore. I've got to get out of here, because they understand that they need connection. When we don't have connection, we become dysfunctional. And the reason is because we're created this way. God did not create us to be disconnected from one another. In fact, it's the exact opposite. God created us to be connected to other people. And we're going to see this morning in the created order. Genesis 2 is the continued story of creation from Genesis 1. And we're going to pick it up in verse 18. This is after God has created Adam, but before God has created Eve. So look at what it says. Genesis 2:18. It says, "Then the Lord God said, 'It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him.'" Let me pause for just a second, and I want to talk about that last phrase, because I know that the words here can cause some consternation for some people. When we see that God says, I'm going to create a helper for Adam, and we know that that helper was Eve, it raises some questions. Like, what is actually God saying here? Is he saying that Eve is somehow Adam's assistant? That she's somehow subservient to him? What does it mean that she's his helper? Does that mean that Adam just gets to boss her around? And does that mean that all of men get to boss all women around? That all of women were just created to be the assistants of man? Is that what this means? So let me just take a second and hit this, because I think it's helpful for us to understand what the Bible says. So Genesis originally was written in the Hebrew language. And so in the Hebrew language, this word help is the word ezer. And some translations translate it as help meet. Others say companion. Most of them say helper. And it's not a terrible way to translate the word. But one of the things that we can do when we want to get a better understanding of a Hebrew word, we don't actually need to know the Hebrew, because there's tools online that you can do this with. You can go and find other places in the Old Testament that use the same word. So where else is the Hebrew word ezer used in the Bible that can help us understand what's meant by this word helper? And one of the places it's used is in Psalm 33, verse 20, where it says, our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. That word help there is the exact same word as Genesis 2:18, ezer. And so we could read it as helper, that our soul waits for the Lord. He is our helper, our ezer, and our shield. So what does this mean? Well, what it means is that my understanding of Genesis 2:18 ought to be parallel with how I understand Psalm 33:20. And none of us would ever say, when Psalm 33:20 says that God is our helper, that means he's our assistant. Right? We would never say that means that we get to boss God around, that God is subservient to us. In fact, we would actually say the exact opposite, right? We would say what it means that God is our helper is that he saves us, that he rescues us, that he does something for us that we cannot do for ourselves. Now, the way I understand ezer, helper, in Psalm 33 ought to be the same way I understand it in Genesis 2. So what is Genesis 2 saying? God is looking at Adam, and what's he saying? He's saying Adam needs someone to save him. Adam needs someone to rescue him, someone to do for him what he can't do for himself. That's why it says a helper fit for him, suited to him. Those are the way it's translated. What it's saying is Adam needs someone that's not like him to do for him what he can't do for himself, so that together, male and female can complement each other. We should never read Genesis 2:18 to say that women are men's assistants, or should be bossed around, or should be subservient, because that's not at all what it means. It means the exact opposite. That men and women need each other, that they rescue each other, that they save each other, that together they make up the image of God. But that's actually not the main point of this verse, is it? The main point of this verse is that God says it is not good that man should be alone. Because up to this point in the creation story, everything has been good. God separated the light from the darkness and said that it was good. God separated the sky from the waters and said that it was good. God created the dry land and said that it was good. God created the sea animals and the birds and said that it was good. God created the sun, moon, and stars and said that it was good. God created the land animals and all the things that creep on the land and said that they were good. Everything is good. In fact, God says it is very good. And now we have Adam, and he says, this is not good. It is not good that the man should be alone. And we can understand this several different ways. One way to see this is that God is saying it's not good for Adam to be alone. Because on his own, he is the only created being that is alone. As you read through Genesis 1 and 2, you see a phrase, according to their kind, repeated over and over again. So it says that God created the vegetation according to their kind. God created the fish according to their kind. God created the birds according to their kind. God created the land animals according to their kind. And what it's saying is he didn't just create one. He created a bunch, and they were all alike, and they were in community, and they were connected to one another, except for Adam. Adam has no one like him. He's alone, and so it's not good for Adam to be alone. It's also, we can read this to be, it's not good for men to be alone. Right? I mean, sometimes we men like to be alone. We like to kind of be the lone ranger, but the reality is it's not good for us to be alone. In fact, it's not good for us to be alone, because if we're on our own, we can't do what God told us to do. Remember, what is the job of humanity in Genesis 1? Be fruitful and multiply. And there is no man who on his own can be fruitful and multiply. And there is no woman who on her own can be fruitful and multiply. We need each other. It is not good for man to be alone. It is not good for woman to be alone, because if we are alone, we can't do what God told us to do. And finally, and this is exactly how we should understand this, it is not good for anyone to be alone. Being alone is not good for us. It's not why we were created. In fact, if you want to experience life the way God created it to be experienced, you cannot do that alone. You have to be willing to share your life with others if you want to experience life as God created it to be. So Adam is alone, and it's not good. But Adam's disconnection does not derail God's plan. You're going to hear me say that a lot this year, because we're going to talk over and over about how all of these dysfunctions in life that we experience, none of them ever derail God's plan, because nothing can derail God's plan. And Adam's disconnection doesn't derail God's plan. In fact, God has a plan to create connection for Adam, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be amazing, and He's going to do it in a way that helps Adam to see his need for connection first. So look what God does in the next verse, verse 19. Now, out of the ground, the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. So this is fascinating. God takes all the animals and sends them to Adam and says, Adam, name them. Now, on one level, what God is doing here is He's helping Adam do his job. Remember, aside from being fruitful and multiplying, one of the jobs of humanity is to manage creation as God would manage it. We are designed to be the caretakers of creation. And so here, God is saying, Adam, I want you to be the caretaker of creation. That means you're going to take care of the animals, and so I'm bringing them all to you so you can get to know them, and I want you to name them. He's asking Adam to organize and have authority over the animals. Now, let me just take a break. I want to talk just about this idea of naming and authority for a quick second, okay? Because there are some theologies out there. There's some people out there who have this idea that you can name something into existence, or you can name it and claim it, right? And if you just speak it out into the universe, then it will come back to you. That's not what this is saying, right? When we talk about naming and having authority, that's not what this is saying. But there is a sense in which we have some power in how we name things. We can't create by naming things. That's only God can create. But there is some power that we have in how we name things. But think about this. Think back in time to a really hard thing that you went through. What do you name that time? Do you say, that was where I got my bitterness, or that was where I got my betterment? You see how that works? How I name that time in my life radically changes my perspective on it. There are things in my life that I look back on and I'm like, that was really bad. But do I choose to name that bitterness or betterment, right? Did that turn me into a bitter, jaded, angry person? Or do I choose to let that change me and shape me into the person God wants me to be? Or what about right now? Like, what are you naming this time that you're in right now? Is this the time of my troubles? Or is this the time of my preparation? See, same thing is going on. You're not changing what's happening. You don't have the power to do that. But how you name it, how you talk about it, how you think about it, radically changes what you get out of it. Because if what you're going through right now is your time of troubles, it's not going to be very helpful for you. It's just going to make you angry. But if this is your time of preparation, then you're going to receive something from this. You're going to grow out of it, and it's going to help you to be the person that God wants you to be. So how we name things in our life matters. There is power in how we name things. And what God is doing with Adam here is that I want you to name the animals. Because by naming them, now you're taking responsibility for them. But there's something else going on here that's really awesome. So as Adam is naming the animals, like looking around, okay, those guys, they're going to be zebras. And I think that's going to be a giraffe. And let's see, that right there, that's going to be a crocodile. Oh, that's going to be a crocodile. Okay, that's going to be an eagle. But as he's doing all of this, eventually Adam notices something, right? Look at the next verse. It says, the man gave names to all livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. Why are there several zebras? And there's a couple of giraffes over there. And that crocodile's not alone. And look, there's a whole bunch of eagles, but there's nothing like me. And so in this moment now, as Adam does what God has asked him to do, Adam has this deep, important realization about himself that I'm not complete. I need something. I need help. You see, sometimes God puts us into situations so we can learn something about ourselves, so that we can discover that we actually need His help. In fact, can I suggest that one of the best places you can ever be in life is a place of realizing that you're not enough? Because when you come to that place and you realize, hey, on my own, I'm not good enough. On my own, I can't do this. I need help. Now you are ready to experience God's provision. Now you are ready to experience God's help. So when you find yourself in these times, right, where it's like, what is going on? I don't understand. One of the first and most important questions you can ask is, God, what do you want me to learn about myself here? What are you trying to teach me about myself? And as you begin to discover that, now God can begin to work in you. So Adam has this realization. I need help. I'm alone. I need to be connected. And now God's ready to go to work on him. So God puts him to sleep, and out of his rib, he creates a woman. And when Adam wakes up, there's Eve. And it's this amazing thing. In fact, the Bible tells us that Adam sings a song to her, right? Flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones. You should be called woman. And then God takes the two and he marries them. Very first wedding. And in verse 24, he gives instruction to them. He says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Now, I know Adam and Eve didn't have a mother and a father, and so what God is doing here is he's setting out an eternal principle about marriage, right? He's saying, look, this is how marriage works. And if we look at this, I actually think there's some things that we can learn about our marriages here. So let me take a quick second. Let me show you 3 words. 3 words that can help you have a more healthy marriage. The first word is devotion. Notice what it says here. It says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. If you want to have the marriage as it was created to be, you need to prioritize your spouse above everything else. That's what it means to be devoted. Be devoted to your spouse more than you're devoted to anything or anyone else. Now, the verse says to prioritize over father and mother. This is really good advice, right? If you're married and something goes wrong, do not go running back to mom and dad. That is the worst thing you can do. You need to stick it out and work together. Prioritize your spouse over your parents. Prioritize your spouse over your children. Prioritize your spouse over your job, over your hobby, over anything and everything. Prioritize your spouse. Make them number one in your life, okay? Prioritize them. That's what devotion means. Second word is sacrifice. Look what it says. It says, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Understand this. For two to become one, both must give something up. When two people come to the altar, so when Mary Ann and I got married, we brought ourselves to the altar. David was David and Mary Ann was Mary Ann. But when we left as one, David and Mary Ann. And what that means is that David has to let go of his Davidness. And Mary Ann has to let go of her Mary Annness. So that no longer do you have two individuals, but you have one unity, David and Mary Ann. So in a healthy marriage, we're putting each other first and we're putting ourselves second. I'm letting go of whatever it is that I think is important to me. I'm letting go of this idea and this need that I have to be fiercely independent, because that's not going to fly in a marriage. Sacrifice in a marriage means I never say things like I deserve. Right? It means I never say things like you need to. Because in those moments I'm prioritizing myself, I'm being devoted to myself, and I'm asking the other person to make a sacrifice instead of making it myself. You see, two people committed to each other, committed to being Jesus to each other, means they will sacrifice anything and everything for one another, and that's where you experience marriage as it was meant to be, right? So devotion, sacrifice, and the third word is trust. Look at what the verse says. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. This is one of the most beautiful sentences in the Bible. This is before the fall, before anything had gone wrong. And you have Adam and Eve, and they're together, and there is a sense in which literally they are naked. They don't have any clothes on, right? But it's much more than that. It's an emotional, spiritual nakedness. It's this idea that nothing is hidden. There are no secrets, and there's no shame. The reason we struggle so much to have this kind of openness with other human beings is because of shame and because of fear. We're worried that if I open myself up to someone else, they might reject me. If they discover my deepest and darkest secrets, they might run. But for Adam and Eve, there's complete openness and there's no shame. And in a marriage, if you want to build trust, the building blocks of trust are authenticity and openness. I have to be willing to be myself, my whole self, right? No masks, no covering up. I have to be open about that. But trust is also nurtured by acceptance and forgiveness. You see, these two have to go hand in hand. If I choose authenticity and openness, and someone else chooses, rather than acceptance, rejection, rather than forgiveness, to hold a grudge, then I've lost my incentive to be open and authentic, right? And I'll think twice about it the next time. I see this in marriages. People come to me and they say, my husband just won't be open with me. My wife just won't be authentic with me, and I can't figure out why. And then I watch them interact with each other, and I'm like, I know why. It's because when they try to tell you the truth about themselves, when they try to be open and authentic with you, you shut them down. You blame them. You reject them. You hold a grudge against them. You bring up the past. That's why they're not being open and authentic with you. You see, trust is built on authenticity and openness, and it's nurtured through acceptance and forgiveness. And when you can learn to be devoted to one another, to sacrifice for one another, and to trust and build trust in one another, you will experience marriage the way God created it to be. But this sermon's not just about marriage, right? This sermon's about connection, because connection is for everyone. And I know that the reality is that not everybody here is married, and not everybody here is going to be married, and that's okay. You see, the reality is that marriage is something that not everybody aspires to, and not everybody has. And sometimes you want it and it doesn't come, and sometimes you don't want it and it does. And it's just a weird thing, right? And so I know that there are many of you who are here this morning who you're not married, and you may think that's a good or a bad thing, and you might not get married, and you don't know, and that may or may not be a good or bad thing. So let me talk about that for just a second. Let me start by giving you just a kind of a life principle. Okay, this is for everybody. You cannot always choose your options in life. All right? Does that make sense? You don't get to choose all of your options. Like if I wanted this morning, if I got up and I said, I really want to wear a purple shirt to church today. You know what? That actually isn't an option for me because I don't have any purple shirts. So I could get up and I'd be like, look through all my drawers, look in my closet, look everywhere. I don't have any purple shirts. So that's not an option for me. It's not something I could choose. I look in my closet, and my choices are limited, right? I can choose black, gray, or blue. I'm kind of a boring person. Your options in life are limited. You don't get to choose all of your options. There's a lot of things that maybe you'd like to choose that you can't, right? That's just the way life works. So you don't always get to choose all of your options, but you can always choose your choices. Regardless of what your options are or are not, you can always choose your choices. Like I could choose this morning whether to wear a blue shirt or whether to wear no shirt. You're all glad about the choice I made, right? So options are limited, but I can always choose my choices. Now, in life, marriage may or may not be an option for all of us. But we can all choose connection. And I want you to hear this. When we read Genesis 2, 24 and 25, God is clearly talking about marriage, and he's got this wedding for Adam and Eve, and it's a beautiful picture. But there's a deeper principle that this is built on. The principle of marriage is built on the principle of connection. And while marriage may not be an option for everyone, connection is an option for everyone. And so whether or not you get to choose marriage doesn't matter. You always can choose connection. And if you don't choose connection, your life will be dysfunctional. Sometimes we have this crazy idea that when life gets dysfunctional, that's when I need to withdraw, and that's when I need to disconnect. And that just makes it worse. When life gets hard, when life gets difficult, when the unexpected bad stuff happens, if I withdraw and I disconnect, I've got nobody to share it with me. I've got no one to bear my burdens with me. I have no one to walk through this with me. And God did not create us to be disconnected from one another. And so when we get to the New Testament, what we see is the picture of the new creation. And in the new creation, there's this word that is used called fellowship. And fellowship is another word for connection. What we discover is that in Jesus' new creation, fellowship or connection is for everyone and is recommended for everyone and is needed by everyone. And this kind of connection is built on the principles of Genesis 2. Let me show you this, okay? Remember our three words for connection: devotion, sacrifice, and trust. We can take those same three words and apply them to every relationship in our life. Acts 2:42 says this, and they, that's the early Christians, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. The very first thing that Jesus' followers did after he left them was they devoted themselves to connection. They devoted themselves to being together. So if I want to experience connection the way Jesus created it to be, then I have to choose to be connected to God's people. I have to choose. I have to prioritize it. I have to devote myself to it. And if I'm devoted to connection with God's people, that means that being together is something I have to do, not something I do if I can. And far too often, I see people who, for them, church is something, I'll do it if I can. It's obviously not you, you're here. It's all those sinners that aren't here, right? Don't tell them I said that. If church is just something I do if I can, then I'm not devoted to connection, and I won't experience life as I was created to live it. I need to be devoted to connection. And look, being here on Sunday mornings is great, but that's the bare minimum. If you truly want to experience fellowship, the kind of connection that God created us to experience, you need deeper relationships with God's people. You need to find places where you can share your life with God's people. That's what it means to be devoted. The second word was sacrifice, right? Sacrifice. Look at Philippians 2. It says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. So put others in front of yourself. Make yourself second. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. You see, connection happens when we choose to serve others and to sacrifice for others. In fact, one of the surest signs of spiritual maturity is when you begin to say, what can I do for others, instead of what can others do for me? Can I share a pet peeve with you guys? I might not tell this to everybody, but I think you guys are pretty open and accepting, and I don't think you'll judge me too harshly for this. Remember what we said, if someone's open and authentic, then you have to respond with acceptance and forgiveness. So there are times, as a pastor, when people will come to me and say something like this. Yeah, Pastor, I was at this other church, and they just didn't offer anything for me, and so I left. Look, I get that. I know that there are churches out there, they're not preaching the gospel, they don't talk about Jesus, they're not providing opportunities for connection. I get that. But at the same time, there's something inside of me that just winces every time I hear that. And what I want to say, and I usually don't, is I hear that, but do you understand that the church is not here to offer you something, but you're here to offer God something? You see, spiritual maturity is when I stop saying, what are you offering me, and start saying, what can I offer you? And if I truly want to experience connection with God's people, I have to be willing to say that. What can I offer to others instead of what is everybody else offering to me? As long as I'm only looking for what I can get out of a relationship, I will never experience the depth of connection I was created to experience. Right? Devotion, sacrifice, and the third word is trust. Look at Galatians 6. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, so this is somebody who's stuck in sin, right? They're struggling, but they can't seem to get out of it. You who are spiritual, or you who are mature, should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. The law of Christ is to love one another. And what Paul is saying is, if you want to love one another, then you got to help each other when you're stuck. When someone's stuck in sin, you got to help them out. But do you understand? It's hard to help someone who's stuck in sin if they're not willing to talk to you about it, if they're not willing to trust you with that. You see, growth comes through change, and change happens when I realize there's something wrong with me that needs to be fixed, and I need to take new steps in a new direction. But I will never see that if I don't have someone who can tell it to me. And so if I want to experience that kind of connection with others, I have to be willing to entrust myself to a community of believers who will be open and honest with me and say things to me that I might not want to hear. And I have to be willing to hear those things and act on them. And when I am in that place, when I am surrounded by people who love me enough to tell me what's wrong with me, and I'm willing to lean on them to help me through it and let them bear my burdens with me, then I begin to grow into the person that God created me to be. This is what connection does for us. Connection allows us to become who God created us to be. But in order to have that kind of connection, requires devotion, sacrifice, and trust. You know, all of us who are here this morning are in different places in life, right? But wherever you are in life, my challenge for you is to cultivate connection. Whether that's in your marriage, or in a friendship, or in your family, or in a small group, or in just a friend group, or with your neighbors, or wherever else it may be, wherever you are in life, cultivate connection. We live in a time where we claim to be more connected than we ever have been before in the history of the world. But we measure connection differently. We measure connection by likes and shares and friends and followers. And in this deeply ironic way, I have thousands of people who are my friends on Facebook, and I have hundreds of followers on Instagram, and I still feel more disconnected than I ever have, right? And this is so true that the more friends you seem to have on social media, the more disconnected you feel, even though you spend more time scrolling through and seeing what everybody else is doing in their lives, knowing what's going on with them, seeing the highlights of their life. Because here's the reality. Connection requires more than information. Knowing a whole bunch of stuff about someone is not being connected to them. Connection requires true interaction, face-to-face relationship. And until I'm willing to have those kind of connections, I will always feel disconnected. And so the challenge here for us is not to get rid of social media. I mean, if you want to do that, I think it'd be good for you. But the challenge here is not to get rid of social media, but to recognize that is a counterfeit connection. And it cannot replace true connection where I have the opportunity to devote myself to others, where I have the opportunity to sacrifice myself for others, and where I have the opportunity to build trust with others so that together we can grow to be the people that God created us to be. You know, that happens on one level here on Sunday mornings. You know some people here, your friends, you hang out, you chat, and that's great. But if you really want to experience that connection, you need more. It requires more time, more interaction, more face-to-face. That's one of the reasons we make a big deal about groups here. You know, joining a group is one of the best things you can do to find connection, but you don't even have to join a group to do it. Call a couple of friends up and say, hey, let's get together. Let's meet at Starbucks. Let's meet at Panera. Come over to my house. Let's just hang out and talk. And you can ask 3 questions of each other that will help you grow much more connected to each other and much more connected to God. 3 questions. Number 1, how have you been devoted to God this week? Number 2, how have you sacrificed for others this week? Number 3, what do you need to change this week? You see, those 3 simple questions, and just talking about them and bearing each other's burdens and building trust can go so far in connecting you with others and helping you experience what you were made to experience, help you grow into the person you were made to be. I hope that this week, wherever you are in life, you will choose to cultivate connection.